Hello, and welcome back to the WARC Podcast. I'm Anna Hamill, Senior Editor at WARC. If you're a regular listener of the WARC Podcast, you'll know that we recently launched our annual Marketers Toolkit Trends Report, which digs into the biggest trends marketers will need to be on top of in 2026. Believe it or not, this is the 15th edition. The Marketers Toolkit is based on exclusive data from more than 1,000 real life marketers around the world, one to one interviews with brand leaders, and analysis from WARC's in house team of experts. Today, we're talking about how Doomscroll fatigue is driving consumers to seek escapism and immersive brand experiences. If you've recently considered throwing your smartphone into the sea, this is the trend for you. And rest assured, you are not alone in feeling that way. McCann World Group projects the escape economy will reach $13.9 trillion by 2028. People are struggling with the weight of the world, and to cope, they're turning to nostalgia, fantasy, and immersive experiences. According to data from Circana, 43% of adults have bought a toy for themselves or another adult this year. And among Gen Z adults, it's 76%. Joining me to discuss this trend in more depth is Rica Facundo, WARC's Managing Editor in Asia Pacific, who wrote this chapter of the toolkit, along with S. Subramanyeswar, Group Chief Executive Officer and Chief Strategy Officer for Asia Pacific at Mullen Lowe Lintas. But before we get into the discussion, a quick thank you to Criteo for sponsoring this episode. They help thousands of brands and retailers have more effective ads by reaching the right people in the right shopping moments, using a mix of smart AI and real-world data that's hard to beat. You can try an interactive demo and learn more at criteo.com/walk. Rica, Subu, welcome to the Walk Podcast.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Anna, for having us.
One of the most interesting shifts in culture over the last couple of years in particular is digital fatigue. So the online spaces that once offered discovery and delight, now they offer frustration rather than fun. And after years of posting details of their lives online, users are now complaining that their social media feeds are full of AI slop, political extremism, or aggressive ads. Subu, you're a strategist at heart. What are you seeing from consumers when it comes to their relationships with their phones and also with social media more generally? How has that changed over the last 5 years, do you think?
Anna, what I'm observing is that consumers haven't fallen out of love with technology. What I would say is they've fallen out of love with what it is doing to their inner lives. Say 5 years ago, the phone was still a gateway to possibility, connection, creativity, serendipity, all these things that we used to talk about. Today, it feels more like an obligation. Now, when I see people are realizing that the more time they spend online, the less alive they feel offline. Okay. The biggest shift to me is actually psychological, more psychological than technological. Okay. Consumers are no longer asking, what can my phone do for me? They're asking, what is it doing to me actually? And that's to me, it's a kind of reframe. It's a very profound reframe, if I may say. And it shows up in their behavior too. Because the rise of quiet consumption over posting, the retreat into smaller private groups, or the rediscovery of hobbies that don't produce any kind of content, and a growing premium on anything that feels human or unmediated or unmonetized. Okay, those seem to be the big things. In many ways, I would say the phone is becoming a good thing is the phone is becoming a functional tool again rather than an emotional companion. Now, from identity device, if I may say, to kind of utility device, and social media, which once felt like the world's playground, and now I would say, like, with the kind of explosion that happened, it feels more like infrastructure now, which is good, useful, but rarely joyful, I would say. Now, that's why we are seeing a shift from performance to presence. People want fewer inputs, or deeper experiences, and spaces that don't ask them to constantly broadcast, don't tell me that, or optimize themselves. They're in a way, what I would say, if I may coin something, they're in a way seeking attention sovereignty, wanting to reclaim authorship over their own inner world. And for to me, what happens is, like, as a brand marketing practitioner, it's a big wake up call. We can't keep assuming attention is infinite, or the digital engagement is the only marker of relevance. The next era to me is about designing for mental well-being as much as reach, and it's about how do you add value without adding noise. And it's also about understanding that the most powerful thing we can give people right now is not another notification. It's a moment of meaningfulness, I would say. And put simply, I would say, like, put simply, consumers are not rejecting technology. What they're doing is, to me, they're reclaiming their agency. They're not anti-digital, I would say, and interestingly, they're pro-human, if I may put it like a good strategist. And that's the cultural mode. To me, I would say, like, we need to design for, brands need to design for.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people listening will really relate to that. Rika, I'm just going to jump to you because I think what Subu was saying really resonated. So, how are we seeing this fatigue driving escapism and nostalgia in terms of other consumer choices? So, we did a podcast on Labubu earlier in the year. Labubu is back if it ever left. We're seeing a little treat culture, as Subu said, like hobby groups, offline type of community. What are you seeing from on the ground?
I really love what Subu said, which is that it's not a technological problem; it's a psychological problem. It's about consumers not liking what tech is doing to their inner lives. But if I take a step back, actually, tech is exacerbating all the stuff that is happening around them. I think a lot of people can probably resonate with this statement, which is the struggle is real. When I was writing this chapter, that was kind of the spirit that I had in mind when writing the motivations behind the escape economy. And Anna, you already mentioned all these different consumer behaviors, whether it's like Labubu, community groups, and the growing trend of kidult toys. But for me, it's important for us not to just look at what people are doing, but why are they doing all of these different behaviors? What meaning are they projecting onto their choices? And this struggle that we're talking about, it really needs an outlet. We talked about Labubu. I have to talk about Labubu. I think Labubu is the most extreme and public example of this. It's not just a fad. To me, this points to the sense of helplessness and wanting to revert back to a time when these little treats and toys made all the problems fade away. And in a nutshell, it's just like adulting just sucks. You know what I mean? Can I just be a kid who just finds joy in a toy, in a treat that I have? We talk a lot about Labubu, but I think the other kind of trending topic in culture, I know, Anna, you love this one, which is the rise of trad wives. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it's kind of like a fantasy content genre made popular on social media platforms. And trad is basically a shortcut for traditional wives. And, at first glance, you'd think that, oh, do women want to revert back to, stereotypical gender roles. But actually, no, this is a form of escapism that's representing a time of economic stability. Because back in the day, traditional gender roles was, you didn't have to go and earn money for the household. But now it's very hard to have to survive on just a single income. So it's important to remember that all these things that we have around us, fiction, the sense of escapism, it taps into this desire for relief from stress by offering these imaginative or alternative narratives. So I think that's why escapism marketing is really having a moment, because we just need a relief for all this struggle that we're feeling.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting perspective on the tradwife phenomena, as well as kind of positioning it within the context of that escapism. Subu, I want to come back to you because as an industry, we talk a lot about social media. It is a critical part of seemingly every advertising campaign, mobile devices as well, they're key marketing channels. In the context of what you and Rika have just said, is it time to start thinking differently about its role within the attention economy? How are your clients thinking about this? Are they thinking about changing their point of view on these channels within their own marketing campaigns?
Oh, the great one. Great question. And Rica, it was a great perspective what you had given. Okay. And Anna, going back to what you had asked, to me, I think we have reached an inflection point. For a decade, social media was viewed as as if I may call it, the gravitational center of the attention economy, the place where culture happened. But today, as I see, consumers are signaling something very different. And it's for us to pick it up. They're telling us that attention is not a commodity anymore. It's a finite cognitive resource. And when that resource is exhausted, the old playbook simply stops working. So, yes, it is time to think differently, not because social media is disappearing, but because its function in people's lives, to me, has fundamentally changed. It's no longer the arena of self expression it once was. It has become a high density space, algorithmic, optimized, and increasingly devoid of emotional resonance. And in that environment, more frequency does not equal more impact. That is damn important for everybody to acknowledge. What matters now is meaningfulness, not just reach. Because clients are feeling that shift. When you ask the question that we said, 5 years ago to me, social was the default answer to every brief. Everything is social first, social thing, and all those things that used to happen. Today, I'm seeing a more nuanced understanding emerge. Brands are asking, where can we genuinely add value? Where can we create presence without creating undue pressure? And where can we step in without becoming part of that noise? There's too much noise out there. And that's a very healthy evolution, I would say. The smartest marketers, to my mind, are reframing social media from being the destination to being a distribution channel, which is what it should rightfully be. It's one more touch point in a larger ecosystem of human experience that I would love to create for my brand. They're investing in IRL, okay, real life activations, in craft, in community led formats, or in content that feels like a contribution rather than a demand. Mm. Designing for I would say depth over volume. That is a good change that I'm seeing. It's not about doing that. Ultimately, the question is not whether social media still matters. Of course, it does. The real question is whether we can use it in ways that honor the culture, that honor that cultural mood, I would say, a mood that prizes agency or intentionality and emotional authenticity of the audience. If we can do that, social will remain powerful. And if we can't do that, to me, consumers will continue to scroll past us with increasing indifference. Absolutely. Again, in short, I would say here, to your question, if I have to put it together, social media has not lost its role, but it definitely has lost its monopoly, I would say. And that shift opens up to me a much more imaginative future for our industry, what we could do going forward.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Rika, how can social media marketing evolve to stay relevant in people's lives, kind of in the context of what Subu was talking about, rather than just being what it feels like at the moment, which is just a fire hose of junk?
I love what Subu said, and I think there's an interesting tension there, which is yes, social media is a dumpster fire of AI slop, but will we stop scrolling on our phones? Probably not. So the question is, what kind of experience are we creating on our phones, on our social media feeds, and whatnot? And I remember a time when when social media and the internet was not a dumpster fire. I grew up in those early days of Tumblr, of Zanga, people unafraid to post cringe content just because, they wanted to. And, maybe, we might not go back exactly to that time, but I think the lesson that we can take from the time when we loved social media was actually the fact that it was real, it was raw, it was unfiltered. And there's a lot of industry discussion right now and a lot of data points that demonstrate that social media is no longer just, it's not about just connecting with your friends. Social media is kind of like it's a broadcast channel, right? You're just watching and seeing all this like entertainment. But these are stories, right? So what kind of stories are you putting out there? Can you inject back that raw and real human element back into that? And I love what Subu was saying, which is social media is just another touch point of human experience. And I think, in this era of AI, that realness is going to become more important than ever before. And we can counter this doom and gloom echo chamber by offering unexpected moments of positivity that people don't want to tune out. I mean, definitely for me, when I don't want to doom scroll, I go to my dog content, right? But easily that could have been something joyful that a brand, is bringing onto my feed. And, the if I can cite a brand that we can all take inspiration from, Duolingo, right? Duolingo is a modern masterclass in, social media marketing right now. But the success, what's interesting when I see Duolingo is that he's just so unhinged. I actually don't know if the owl is a he or a she. They, the owl is just so unhinged. So I feel like we need to lean into that right now because the real, the raw, and the messy, that's what consumers need at this point in time.
Yeah, there's a lot of brands out there doing really fun, kind of crazy sounding. I'm sure the strategy is amazing, but kind of the execution is really offbeat in terms of their social presence. I know Brita Filters on Instagram and TikTok, their content is super surreal, really fun, really interesting. Just going back to what you said about the good old days, kind of as an elder millennial myself, it's kind of sad to see what Twitter has become. In the context of what you said, I think Twitter is a really good example of how a super fun kind of platform that people really enjoyed using has just lost a lot of its former luster, so to speak. So, yeah, I really, really resonate with what you're saying there. This episode of the WARC Marketers Toolkit podcast series is sponsored by Criteo. To learn more about their data-driven solutions, check out criteo.com/walk. Social media fatigue and the anti-doomscroll trend sets us up perfectly for what we anticipate will be gaining momentum in 2026: immersive, real-life brand experiences. Data from the Marketers Toolkit reveals that marketers are pursuing both routes for enhanced experiences: digital channels and in-person experience of the brand. 74% of marketers are considering the role of real life or immersive experiences as part of their overall brand experience in 2026. Think pop up stores, IRL activations, or tapping into the nostalgia of community and escapism in their communications. Now, to be clear, marketers are still all in on digital channels. 78% of those we surveyed consider those touchpoints to be a vital part of their brand experience. But this data also makes clear that marketers are trying to claw back some of the customer journey to offline touchpoints too, reminding shoppers of how their products bring people together. Subu, did this data point surprise you at all?
Not at all. It doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, actually, if you ask me, it confirms. I think it confirms something that we have been sensing intuitively for a while. And now after a decade of algorithmic saturation, if I may call that, consumers are craving for what I would call embodied encounters, moments where a brand is not just a piece of content, but a place, a feeling, or a shared human experience. So the pendulum swinging back toward IRL isn't a rejection of digital. To me, it's a rebalancing of the human psyche. We often forget that the attention economy is not just about capturing eyes. Like, it's a wrong measure. It's about how do I nourish the minds of the audience? Because digital channels are extraordinary for reach, but they operate in two dimensions. Immersive experiences, when I look at it, they operate in all five senses versus two dimensions. And that's the difference. And when people are fatigued by the infinite scroll, the scarcity and physicality of real life encounters, suddenly they become culturally premium and people crave for those things. That's why I'm not surprised to see 74% of marketers leaning into experiential. What they're recognizing is that connection itself has become a currency. A pop-up store, a tactile moment, or a shared piece of nostalgia. These are not just touch points. They are actually, they are, if we really think a little deep, they are, to me, emotional artifacts. They anchor a brand in memory in a way no impression count can ever replicate. And I can see some of our clients. The clients are thinking about IRL in a much more strategic or integrated way, I would say. It's no longer about spectacle for spectacle's sake. It's about designing experiences that solve for what digital can't actually. Community, intimacy, texture, giving a nice texture to that experience, serendipity. The smartest brands, to me, are not choosing between digital and physical. They're actually beautifully choreographing the dance between the two. How do I get both into play and then see what is the optimum mix, what's the best solution that you can get? A powerful in-person moment becomes fuel for digital storytelling and digital, I would say, anticipation. It'll amplify the physical moment that you go through. So to me, no, the data doesn't surprise me at all. It validates, in fact, a deeper cultural shift that is happening. People want to feel the world once again, and brands that create those spaces, not just screens, creating those spaces and not just screens, I would say, for those feelings will define the next chapter of what marketing should be.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Rika, when it comes to delivering those immersive brand experiences, how do brands need to think differently? Kind of bouncing back to what Subu said about a cultural psyche shift around, getting back out into the community and touching real things, enjoying real things.
Yes, Anna, you speak of the cultural psychological shift that's happening amongst consumers, but I would argue that marketers need to have that mindset shift and kind of to catch up to the way that consumers are behaving. And I'll quote something from Yael Cesarcas from RGA, who nailed this problem in the head. This is an oversimplification, but usually brand marketing often lives in the emotional stratosphere, while customer experience resides in the optimization basement. And put another way, brand experience about feelings, while CX is about the funnel. But we need to bring together these two separate but interconnected disciplines back together. We need to reimagine the customer journey through an emotional lens. It's not just about optimizing for efficiency. Of course, those things are important, efficiency and conversion. But we also need to understand where in the customer journey does it make sense for the brand to come back in to connect with an audience on an emotional level. In many ways, again, this has always been best practice, but given today's climate, where, as Subu was mentioning, connection is that it's always been the currency, but it's even more of a premium on that currency. That is what is necessary to succeed in the escape economy.
One of the big attractions of digital channels and social media marketing in particular is that performance is instantly measurable. What needs to change about how marketers capture the effectiveness of these non digital brand experiences? Subaru, I'll go to you first.
To be honest, the challenge with IRL experiences isn't that they're hard to measure. It's that we have been measuring them with wrong instruments. Digital channels trained us to actually fetishize immediacy, clicks, conversions, cost per anything, all these kinds of things we rolled up and then made them as the in thing to have. But real life experiences don't behave like that. Their value accumulates in memory, not in dashboards. So what needs to change is our time horizon and our definition of impact. A powerful physical encounter to me doesn't always show up as a spike in next day sales. It often shows up months later, weeks later, or months later in higher loyalty, greater advocacy, deeper emotional equity, or a willingness to pay a premium, which every marketer craves for, every brand and business craves for. And these are the metrics of meaning, not just metrics of efficiency. What the walk data highlights to me is that most marketers are still treating immersive experiences as brand moments, which are evaluated through brand health surveys and sentiment. But in the escape economy, emotion isn't the soft stuff, it's the strategic stuff, I would say. We need to integrate customer experience metrics that treat experience as a driver of retention, lifetime value, and share of mind. In other words, what I would say is we need to measure memory as carefully as we measure media. Our industry, when I look at it, loves things that are instantly quantifiable. Okay, but it's easy to provide as proof point to somebody. I've done this, and this is what it delivered. But what is instantly quantifiable is often marginally valuable. The deeper effects, trust, affinity, belonging, they're hard to capture, but far more predictive of long-term business outcomes. So the shift to me, what the shift is required, what is required is philosophical as much as analytical. From measuring what is easy to measuring what actually matters, and from chasing efficiency, I would say, to understanding the emotional efficacy. If immersive experiences are to succeed, now we got to value the kinds of impact that can't be reduced to a click, the ones that live in the hearts and not dashboards. That's what we need to keep that in mind and differentiate between these two. Then you start seeing far greater impact.
Yeah, really good advice there. Rika, what's your view?
My view is similar to what Subu was saying, and the WARC data also shows that marketers still rely on brand health metrics, survey interviews, and sentiment analysis to track emotional touch points. But emotion is critical for the customer journey. So we should be integrating some of those metrics, like, loyalty, lifetime value, retention, into the way that we are thinking about measurement. And, speaking about a non-digital brand experience, actually these are better positioned to create that emotional stickiness that helps prevent switching or reduce churn. And this is going to be more incredibly important now where again, consumers are spoiled for choice. They're being squeezed, right? So you need to give them a reason to stay beyond just a discount. Is it something that you've proved your value to them, that it's a little bit more priceless, it provides meaning and whatnot? So we need to kind of, think that measuring for emotion is not just a brand thing, it's also a customer experience thing. And it's not just a long term thing that you see in brand health tracking, but it also has outsized impact on even short term metrics.
Yeah, we share some great examples of this in the toolkit as well as to brands which are really kind of doing this very well. Rika, can you share a couple of examples of what caught your eye?
Yeah, for sure. The first example I'll give is from Instacart. CMO Laura Jones described their Summer of 1999 campaign. And, like many brands, they also tapped into nostalgia marketing. It's been a big trend for a while now. But what's really important to note here is not to tap into nostalgia marketing for the sake of it, but she was able to link it back to performance or sales. So it's not just the vibe of Summer of 1999. They also brought back the prices of 1999, right? So you're not only giving a cultural respite, but you're also giving like an economic respite for very budget strapped consumers. Another example I'll give is from Lego, a brand and product that historically has been aimed at kids, but also is there for the kids at heart, which plays really nicely into that kidult industry and category I was talking about earlier. And in the UK, they tapped into this kidult consumer, but it wasn't just about hey, these are some cool toys that you can also use for for your leisure, but they also collaborated with podcasters because they acknowledged the reason why people were using more toys in their adult lives. It's because it was, coping mechanism. It's a way to relieve stress. So it's important for us to, yes, we tap into these feelings of escapism and nostalgia, but it can't be an empty spectacle, right? Understand the why and find a way to link it back to bottom line performance.
Yeah, no one has ever been upset to receive Lego as a gift, regardless of whether they are a child or an adult. Everybody loves to get involved in that creative and building things. I think that's a great example. Subu, are there any additions that you're seeing in the wider Asia market that tap into this as well? You're the CSO of Asia Pacific, I know.
Yes. Like whenever you say about Asia, I'm sure Asia is always colorful. Okay. When I look at it, and interesting, Enrica, is like, oh, Asia has always been a laboratory for cultural reinvention. And we are seeing that play out again in the way brands are rethinking experience. Now, what is emerging across the region is a very Asian idea, which is interesting. Connection that is both, I would say, communal and deeply sensory. Experiences that I would say don't just entertain, but actually restore. And let me give you some examples of markets. Now, what I notice, what I observe in Japan and Korea, for example, we're seeing a rise in immersive formats that feel almost meditative, spaces that designed to slow you down rather than speed you up. Beautiful it is, I thought. And when you see in Southeast Asia, and festivals, pop-ups, and brand worlds are becoming social anchors, and they're all giving young people a place to belong offline. And in India, where I sit, actually, the blending of heritage craft with digital storytelling, that's creating some beautiful experiences that feel both modern and at the same time meaningful too, quite meaningful. So what's striking to me is that these are not just spectacles for spectacle's sake. They're designed around emotional utility, to help people feel grounded, to feel connected, and to feel inspired. And that to me is the heart of the escape economy in Asia. Not escapism, I would say, not escapism as distraction, but escapism as a kind of renewal. So, yes, to me, to your question, the region is embracing a beautiful immersive brand experiences. But the real innovation to me is not in the technology, it is in the intent. Brands are asking clearly the questions today: how do we enrich people, not just engage them? How do we design moments that matter? long after the campaign ends. And that shift to me is profoundly hopeful. If anything, to me, Asia is reminding the world that marketing's greatest power is not reach, but it is resonance. And in this fatigued digital era, I would say resonance is the rarest and most valuable outcome we can create. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much. That is all we have time for. I feel like we could talk a lot longer about this, but this has been an incredibly thought-provoking and interesting conversation. So, Subu, Rica, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure, Anna.
Thanks, Anna, for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the WARC Podcast. Our Marketers Toolkit podcast series is sponsored by Criteo. Stay tuned for more episodes in coming weeks as we dig into more trends for 2026. The Marketers Toolkit is now available to all subscribers on WARC.com. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and follow the WARC Podcast. And for more on Criteo, check out criteo.com/WARC. Thanks for listening.